Good morning. We're here with Tom Young, Managing Director with ISG, and also a great friend of HCL's.
Happy to be here.
Very much. Thank you for joining us, Tom. Really appreciate it. Listen, I just kind of want to start out with, you've seen quite a few service providers over the years. You've seen quite a few clients in your position with ISG. And what I'd like to maybe start out with is very simply, how do you define success in an outsourcing relationship in all the ones that you've seen and how it's occurred?
Yeah, well, I think it's hard to say it in a simple sentence, but I would say when the client refers to you as a supplier or a vendor, you're probably not in a success mode for these kind of services. But if they view you as a partner and the relationship is collaborative and relies less on framework and formality of the agreement and more on how do we make things work together, sort of the more informal it is, probably the more successful it is. And so, but the informality has its issues, so you got to make sure there's some structure to it. But if our working relationship together as a partner is informal, it's more likely to be successful.
So, from your perspective, obviously you've seen companies like HCL,
right?
Over the years, some do very well, some not do so well. What do you think some of the best practices are from a sourcing provider, from a service provider side? Okay, in terms of being able to work not only with you as a third-party advisor and a consultant, but also with the client.
Yeah, I think, I said when we were talking on one of the panels earlier about trust and transparency being critical. I would encourage service providers to be open as possible and be as flexible as possible and open up being transparent, because that will beget transparency from the buy side. And I think that transparency is going to yield that informal communication that's going to allow collaborative solutions and mutual value discovery around how you can do better business together.
Yeah, maybe make it more oriented, or make this question more direct, more personal. Is most service providers, HCL is probably no different in some respects, want to have that relationship direct with the client. So even in that, they're really looking at trying to establish that relationship very directly, almost sometimes to the detriment of walling out the advisor or the consultant. And what would you say to service providers that want to try to do that?
Well, I know there are situations where advisors and intermediaries become obstacles to that relationship, and that could even be procurement, right? Being an obstacle to that. I think if you get to the point where you're trying to develop the relationship in the 11th hour, when a transaction is going to happen or a purchase decision, you're too late. The relationship starts outside of the brokerage of commerce. So if I want to do business with you as a firm to firm, I'm developing a relationship with you, and then ultimately business will come from that. But if I wait for you to have a buy decision in the marketplace and I'm one of the vendors and I say, hey, let's go have a relationship, it's too late, right? Because that cycle's already started. And so I would say your best advisors, I know when I'm out in the field, I try to facilitate those relationships because I don't want to get in the way of it, because that's ultimately successful and it's good for both parties.
So from your perspective, and you were on a panel earlier today, how do you see the industry changing? How do you see this changing as we're going forward? Because one of the things we see with clients as they move to second and third generation sourcing, they're sitting there saying, okay, I don't need an advisor for the whole thing. I need an advisor based on rifle shots. And we're seeing that trend begin to develop. And then the other is clients are becoming a lot more smarter about how they buy these services because they've become a lot more educated and they're a lot more confident in themselves.
Right.
So how do you see that changing, and how do you see the effects of that for both of us?
Yeah, the landscape's changing tremendously. So if you go way back, say 10, 15 years ago, we had these one neck to choke models where one vendor would get all this huge scope and take over. They call it your mess for less. And then we started to see over the last decade the fragmentation into logical towers. And now we're seeing further fragmentation to almost out-tasking at a level where point solutions with technology is inserted into the supply chain. And so, but when you do that, it's like buying a car through the spare parts. At the end of the day, you still have to have a car that works. And so there's going to be lots of opportunities for vendors to do service integration to help bring together logical components and put that together. So if I'm looking for a partner a third-party partner. I'm looking for somebody who's going to help me solve my problems, not to say that they're going to provide all those problems, but they're going to facilitate getting it done. So you may leverage an EMC solution or a NetApp solution for storage, and not say, well, we have to do it ourselves, right? Because you're just there to facilitate it, and I'm looking for you to help me solve my problems. So again, where this is going to evolve to, I think the successful relationships are going to be collaborative and informal to help me solve my business problems in a very rapidly changing environment.
So that means even from an ISG perspective, the methodology that you all started out with in terms of your heritage, that's got to change as well.
It does. The RFP by its very nature is a prescriptive approach. It says, I know what I want, and it focuses largely on optimizing P in a P times Q model, right?
Yeah.
It's an advanced procurement, if you will. But where the market is moving to is you want to start to optimize the product of P times Q, or even more so, the business outcome.
Okay.
And so in order to do that, I need to take a step back and not be so prescriptive to the market. I'm going to come to you, Joe, and I'm going to say, hey, here's my problem. I got this environment. Here's my business situation. Here are my objectives. What can you do for me? Now, if we have a relationship and you know my business, you're going to say, what you really should do is grab this over here, mash it with this, redo this, and then you have a new platform. And you say, that sounds interesting, let's talk more. But the nature of that solution is based on a relationship, based on your understanding of my business, and my flexibility and willing to have an informal dialogue around how to solve that.
Okay.
Then once we come to that sort of, what I'll call a handshake,
right.
I want to then put some codification around it, but just not the 1,000-page document.
Yeah.
That's too much.
Yeah, that's a little bit hard to carry.
It is.
Yeah,
and frankly, people don't use it.
Right.
They use it when things go bad, but they don't use it to maintain the goodness in the relationship.
Well, the problem is any relationship is dynamic.
That's right.
Sure
That's
you
right.
can tell. So, really appreciate the conversation this morning. Could you just leave us with maybe a couple of thoughts? What do you think some of the best advice you could give to a client today looking to use a third-party advisor, how to do that, as well as to a service provider?
I would tell people on the buy side right now to start to pick their third-party partners on soft criteria, not hard criteria. The hard criteria would be who won the RFP or who won the bake-off for a purchase decision. Soft criteria would be, do I like them? Do I trust them? Do they know my business? Do I think they can solve my problems? And do they have a good reputation? So if I use those 5 soft criteria, I'll use those, pick somebody, and then we'll figure out how to do business together.
Okay.
And that's what I would do. I would go from hard to soft in this marketplace.
And what advice would you give a service provider today in working with an advisor?
I would make it easy to do business. So I use the analogy in our panel about the difference between sort of an RFP structure being like a marriage,
right.
And very formal and documented and hard to get in, hard to get out. I would make it easy to get into business and make it easy for the buyer to say, hey, if you don't like it, you can leave. So you want to make it easy on, easy off so that you can have that trust, mutual collaboration, and informal aspects to the relationship so that I feel comfortable doing business with you.
Well, Tom, thanks a lot.
You
I
bet.
really appreciate your time
All right.
today. Very, very
thanks.
much.
Thanks, Joe. Good luck. Bye-bye.